record. I hadn't done that yet. Just by way of review, last time we talked about the greater vehicle. It might feel like a long time ago. We've only had one class since the exam, and this is what we started with. I introduced some new ideas. They're not maybe even they're not entirely new. They're just sort of expansions, right? This is the greater vehicle. Everything's getting bigger. Everything's getting better. Everything's getting more widespread. So, for example, bodhisattva, we already knew that word, didn't we? Somebody on the path to enlightenment. The only difference is it used to just apply to the Buddha, right? To Siddhartha in that book that we read. But now it kind of can apply to lots of people, right? You too could be a bodhisattva if you want to. How do you do it? Is you take the vow, remember that? And I drew kind of the path on the board and you move up in the ranks, right? They're actually called grounds. You don't have to know that, but the bodhisattva grounds, there are 10 of them. So we have this new practitioner, right? This new savior figure. I said they take a vow. What is the vow all about? What do they vow to do? What is the bodhisattva vow? Again, this isn't new. All sentient beings. That's right, exactly. It becomes sort of a stock phrase, right? So lots of different ways to say it, but yeah, end suffering for all sentient beings. I think I mentioned there's a prayer where you wish that all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, and they're free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So that should be pretty clear. We got this new ideal practitioner, the bodhisattva. We talked about the 6 perfections, which they'll show up in some capacity on the exam. I probably won't force you to list them off, but it's good to know generally what they are, right? There are these virtues that can be perfected to an incredible degree. So the first one is generosity. And remember, I told you the story about the Buddha in a past life where he was ultra generous. He was so generous. He gave away his children. He gave away his wife. He gave away his eyeballs, right? And it's such a ridiculous story. To take it literally feels like, a mistake, right? I don't think the moral of the story is that you too should give away your eyeballs. So it's worth thinking about what is the moral of the story, right? What is the point of talking about this? And maybe I can just give you my take. I'd be curious to hear if you guys have any takes on it. We didn't read the story, so it's hard for you to have a take, but sometimes people do lose their body parts. Sometimes people do lose their children and their spouses, right? Does that happen to people? It's sad to say, but it does happen to people, particularly now, right? This time of COVID. A lot of people are losing their loved ones. And I hate to state that somewhat in a cavalier fashion, but it is true. And this meditation, thinking about giving away someone rather than losing them, perhaps prepare someone for these difficulties, right? To be willing to give someone away. Again, I would not recommend taking this literally, but let's say you get eye cancer or something, you have to have your eyes taken out. This sort of story, this sort of thought process might prepare you for that event, right? Rather than feeling like you're such a victim, you could imagine losing these things with some sort of agency at the same time. Again, not a beautiful image, but it's something perhaps worth considering. So generosity, ethical disciplines, patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom. There are different ways to translate those 6 virtues, but there are stories and scriptures and methods for cultivating them. And again, how do you move up this bodhisattva path? Is by cultivating these perfections, right? These virtues. And then finally, we focused on one more of the virtues, the perfection of wisdom, right? And we talked about middle way philosophy. So we've talked about the middle way before. Again, this is not a new idea. The middle way between 2 extremes. Before, it was asceticism and indulgence. So hopefully that's drilled into your memories. What is this new middle way between? I drew kind of an XY. No, is this XY? This is the Y-axis, this is the X-axis. I drew an X-axis thing on the board here where I put something on this side and something on this side, and we were talking about a middle way philosophy in between. What were the 2 extremes that we're going in the middle of? So he's looking through her notes.
Was one of them nihilism?
One of them was nihilism. Yes, I'm gonna write it in the chat. Oh, some people got some stuff. Asceticism and indulgence. That is last time, Alexander. So nihilism is one of them. Nothingism. What was the other one? Absolutism. Yeah. So that I think is how I phrased it. Absolutism. Another way you could phrase it is it's just the difference between non-existence and existence. Actually, I think I have a slide about this, so I don't need to write it out. Yeah, so we've got this middle way philosophy, these true status of phenomena is between existence and non-existence, right? So it's just saying many of us think the world is as it appears to be, right? Some people live life that way. And then some people live life thinking nothing is as it appears to be. And actually, something struck me when I was teaching the other class and doing the same sort of exercise with them. It made me think of QAnon. Would you agree with me that QAnon is sort of nihilistic? How is QAnon nihilistic? I mean, this is, again, sort of my take, but I'm curious to hear what you guys say. Is QAnon nihilistic? How so? And what do they believe? Yeah. So there's sort of a two-step process, right? I don't know if you guys could hear Aiden, but he basically said that they don't necessarily believe facts or even their own perceptions, right? If they're actually looking at the world with sort of open eyes, they wouldn't believe what they see. That is all untrue. It doesn't exist, right? It's false. It's lies, and you're all sheeple, right? On the other hand, they come back with sort of a new narrative that is manufactured by wherever it comes from, Fox News and whatever website they're looking at, and then they kind of move back in this direction with whatever the hell they want it to be. And you know, I hate to sort of glorify QAnon, but there's something very similar happening in Buddhism, where you reduce things into non-existence through this concept of emptiness. Remember, emptiness is this absence of inherent existence. It's basically saying, okay, you think you know what's going on, but you know, what's a good example? Something like you guys are Jaspers right now, right? There's a sense of your being like I am a student at Manhattan College, and that is who I am. You guys agree with me? Student at Manhattan College. My job is I'm a teacher at Manhattan College, but you know that could even change, right? And so there's nothing like inherent inside of me that says I'm a Jasper. There's nothing like if I looked, you know, under my sweatshirt that says Manhattan College on it. There's nothing in my heart. There's nothing in my brain. There's nothing in my body. There's nothing besides my ID card that says I am a part of this community, and yet this is a very important part of who I am, right? And so this is the process: is we have these things that seem just sort of obviously true, and yet when we investigate them, they sort of dissolve and they sort of fall apart. We could come up with probably better examples than that, but maybe that's enough of that. So we can dissolve our usual identities into this emptiness, right? Which is sort of building from that idea of impermanence we talked about before. If everything is impermanent and we can't tell that it is impermanent, then something is wrong, right? We have some kind of misrepresentation of reality happening, and that's really where this philosophy of emptiness comes from. Now, the way it's presented is you're not supposed to go all the way to non-existence, right? You got to still stay within the middle here, but often people get pretty close to it. Now, closer to the side of existence is this Buddha nature, right? And again, this is kind of where the QAnon parallel comes in, is once you dissolve everything into emptiness, you can then reestablish it as Buddha nature, right? And that's where we cut off last time. And so what does Buddha nature mean? Well, we saw a bunch of metaphors, right? Remember all these metaphors? And we started to talk about them last time. Did we finish? I don't think we went through every single one of them. We don't need to go through every single one of them. Were there any metaphors in particular that you guys liked? What were some good metaphors? You guys remember good conversations about metaphors from last time? Well, that's why we're reviewing. The gold and the filth. Is that because I was talking about gold in a pile of shit? That might have been it. Yeah. Yeah. The way it's translated, they talked about waste. Say it again. Which one? To what? Probably. I don't remember. I think I just said, go nuts and talk about whatever you want to talk about. But yeah, that was basically the goal of the assignment, right? Was to of the class session was to kind of go through, become familiar with some of these metaphors, get a sense of them. It sounds like the gold in filth one was particularly evocative for folks. And just so we're on, why don't we come up with another one and we can start to think about what they mean. What's another good metaphor that people talk about? Chat, give us a metaphor. I know you guys think you can hide behind the screen, but I know you're all there somewhere. What was another metaphor y'all talked about last time? It'd be much easier if they're in the room because then I could grill them, right? And now they're. What are you guys? Are you guys here? I can't even tell. Let me open up the screen. See, yeah, everybody's blank. No faces looking back at me.
I think we talked about the golden statue and the rags before.
Okay. Gold in the rags. That's pretty good. What'd you come up with? Gold in the rags. These negative emotions and evil actions cover the most virtuous body. I hate to say it, it's kind of the same thing as the gold and filth, isn't it? It's basically you have this golden thing, it's covered in some filthy thing. So maybe not so interesting to go into that one. What about some of these flowers or honey or wheat? Anybody talk about those? Similar idea, right? So negative emotions. In the reading, they were often called klesha, covering something really good like honey or the kernel of wheat. Again, it's a little redundant. We don't have to go through this in any great length. What is the point of all these metaphors? Why do they matter? Do they matter? Yeah, they matter. They probably matter. Why do they matter? So if you couldn't hear him, Aiden is making a bold claim that these build a foundation for the religion, almost like the stories in Christianity, like a parable or something like that. Okay. What kind of foundation do they build? You want to pass? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find this metaphor inspiring, or do you feel like it's sort of basic and not that interesting? Did anybody think about the gold inside of them as they were working through this week and being covered by the filth of all the difficulties of life these days? Anybody find the gold inside of them? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one issue with this is it's totally, I'm going to use a word you probably don't know. It's analogical. My advisor used to say this, and I didn't get what he was talking about until pretty deep into graduate school. Analogical as opposed to logical, right? So logical is you make an argument, right? A philosophical argument with if and then statements, and there's sort of a logical progression. We could call it rational, right? Something like that. This is not really rational. You guys agree with me? These are just stories, right? Like Aiden was saying, and I think one reason, as Sophie is saying, it makes Buddhist teachings accessible is because you don't have to be a highly educated person to follow what is happening here, right? Anybody could imagine a golden statue wrapped in some kind of filth or rag or whatever. This image of a treasure that's underground. I could imagine that, right? If I'm a poor person, imagining there being some sort of hidden treasure is a very appealing idea. And so these images, they don't build on rationality, logic, or any sort of argument or anything like that. It's basically presenting a story, right? And there is a power in stories. You might notice this is something we do a lot in this class. We read the life story of the Buddha. Now I'm giving you these stories. There is something accessible about them. It's a little bit hard to analyze them once you get the metaphor. It's like, okay, well, that's the metaphor, and then you sort of move on. But really, the point of these, and maybe I think I pose this as a question here, is what is the practice, right? It's worth asking. We have these stories, we have these metaphors. What would the practice of these metaphors look like? Can you come up with anything? It's not really, well, it's given toward the end of the text, but it's not very clear. It's not really developed. And we'll come back to this question again, which is why I'm posing it now, is we'll see pretty elaborate practices built around this theory of Buddha nature, but it's sort of nascent at this point. It's not really fully fleshed out. So what do you guys think? What would a Buddha nature practice look like? What could you do with these metaphors? Beyond just like, okay, cool story. What can you do with this? Because Buddhism is all about practice in the end, isn't it? Meditation, could you make a meditation out of Buddha nature? What would that look like? Trying to find the gold while you're meditating?
Maybe like not like Christianity or like
Recite the scripture. Yeah, actually, that's a great insight there. I don't think we got to this point last time, so maybe I'll just summarize it very quickly. You could really do both of these things. Again, if you couldn't hear, for the folks who are playing along at home, so one suggestion is maybe you can meditate and try to find the gold, right? And we talked about a moment ago how you can kind of dissolve your identity into emptiness and then build it back up in the form of Buddha nature. This is one practice, and we will see a meditation that effectively revolves around this concept toward the end of class today. And this idea of reciting the scripture is also a very common practice. So toward the end of the book itself, we get this story where the Buddha's talking to Vajramati and basically saying how if you accept, copy, or even revere but a single one of these metaphors, you'll get all this virtue, right? You'll get all this good karma. So we see what some people have called a cult of the book happening here. Cult of the book, where books tell the reader to copy themselves, right? It's almost like, you have to kind of go back in time to think about this and make sense of it. But 100, well, I guess it would be more like 1,700 years ago, there would not be a Xerox machine, would there? There would not be a printer, would there? So what do you do if there's no Xerox machine or a printer? Let's say Sophie has a book and I would like a copy of that book. What do I have to do? Write it by hand. Printing press isn't around yet. In fact, it is the Buddhists who invent the printing press for this reason. Pretty crazy. The earliest printed books in human history are Buddhist. Yeah. Actually, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, right? We were talking about the Perfection of Wisdom a while ago. One specific Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the Diamond Cutter Sutra, is the first book to be printed on a printing press. And again, it's for this reason. But in the very old days, you'd have to write by hand. That didn't happen until, I want to say, the 8th century or so, 8th and 9th centuries, around that time. So you'd have to copy by hand. So that becomes the practice. The book itself is saying, copy me by hand, and if you do that, then you'll get a bunch of merit. Now, if we sort of zoom out and take this outsider perspective, we can see, all right, this is how the Buddhist tradition flourishes, right? We copy the text, I take it away with me, somebody else can copy the text from me, I can pass it on to somebody else, right? The missionaries bring these texts out and spread them all over Asia, and this is how the tradition spreads, right? This greater vehicle spreading throughout all of Asia, from South Asia into East Asia. Another sort of interesting thing is it tells you not to meditate, right? It says go out and kind of spread the good word. So again, this is it's a very missionary sort of religion at this point. It's saying don't meditate too much, copy the books, spread them around, teach people about these metaphors, and that is how you do this practice. So kind of interesting, right? I think the parallel to Christianity is definitely there, right? Using stories to illustrate religious ideas, and then also this emphasis on missionary moves, right? Trying to spread the faith, trying to convert people. Okay, so that's it for that. Any questions about Buddha nature? So again, what is Buddha nature? It's this potential for enlightenment in all beings. It's illustrated by all these metaphors. You have this enlightenment wrapped up in all the gunky goo bad stuff. What is the gunky goo bad stuff? What does that represent? I don't think we've said that yet, have we? Straying away from the path. What is it? Yes, it's suffering, but I think best stated, it's the causes of suffering. So what are the causes of suffering? Craving, ignorance, hatred, jealousy, all the bad stuff, envy, all those bad emotions. And so there's a sense that as long as we have these bad emotions, and as this shows, we all do, right? We do, I do, and you guys probably do too. We do have all these emotions that cause us suffering. And so we're wrapped up in it, but it doesn't mean there isn't something there already, right? It doesn't mean there's something valuable in there too. So that's an important message that's being sent here. Okay, y'all should love yourselves, as Justin Bieber once said. Didn't he say that? Love yourself. That song's a bit more tongue-in-cheek, though. I don't think they're talking about Buddha nature there. So, all right, meditation, new topic for today. Meditation. Have you guys meditated before? Yeah. It's interesting teaching this topic because I feel like a lot of the things I teach, people don't know as much about when it comes to like Tibet and the Dalai Lama and that sort of stuff. People don't know as much about that anymore. But meditation is still quite big, right? I feel like it's maybe even gotten bigger as it's sort of been stripped of its context. And so, does anybody want to share a meditation story? Giovanni's done it before. Someone tell us about meditation. Somebody in the chat want to share a meditation story? What kind of meditation have you done? What is meditation like? What's the point? What do you do? Is it cool? Is it interesting? Is it boring? Chat, you guys got anything for us? You guys are very quiet today.
What was the one that we did before? I forgot what it was. It was like I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was a specific kind.
Mindfulness, perhaps? And don't worry, we have a new meditation for today. So I know you might be worried. I'm going to make you do that same old meditation, but I got something new for you. Has anybody heard of mindfulness? You guys done mindfulness before? Aiden, you know mindfulness? You've seen ads for it. Interesting. Where did you see ads for it? The app. We are going to talk about the app. I think I know what you're talking about. Are you thinking of Headspace?
Yeah, you got it.
Headspace. Yeah. So that is what I discovered as I was preparing for class. It's really over the winter. There was a Netflix show on Headspace where it just showed up, recommended for you. I was like, what the hell is this? Some kind of meditation show on Netflix? But it's actually kind of amazingly done. I'm very impressed by it. So that's what we're gonna kind of give a try today. Chat is predictably silent. Giovanni bravely said yes, but he doesn't want to elaborate. That's fine. But what was Headspace?
I know. I've always wondered like how it works. What happens when you get it? You know what I mean?
When you get meditation?
Yeah, because I got like ads for it, and it's like it'll help you sleep and stuff.
I see. Well, yeah. Well, I have a lot to say about it, but let's get there first. Then we can say some things. So what is meditation? Why don't we start with that? Altered state of consciousness induced in a controlled manner. Have you guys ever been in an altered state of consciousness? I listen to guided meditations on YouTube when I'm stressed. Okay, Astrid, you're sharing. I like that. Okay. Would you say that they help you out? Do they work? Yeah. Good. Could you tell us how do they work? Do you have a sense of like what do they do to make you less stressed out? You might be typing, so I want to give you some time. As you're typing, though, I'm going to continue. So we've got altered state of consciousness. Have you guys ever been in an altered state of consciousness before? What does this make you think of? Are you too bashful to talk about it with your teacher?
Like you're not like, you get hammered.
You get hammered? That's a nice way to put it. Yes, getting hammered. Yeah. Okay, so Astrid said something more wholesome than what we're talking about. She wrote that it just talks to you through clearing your mind and putting yourself in a clearer, better mental state. I do yoga sometimes. Okay, now people are coming out with some stories. Jiu-jitsu, after training, coach makes us sit cross-legged with eyes closed and just focus on breathing. Very good. Yeah. So clearing your mind, putting yourself in a clearer, better mental state. So yeah, you guys know you've done this before. Very good. We will do these very practices. So hopefully some of you experienced meditators can help fill us in on all of the details of this sort of thing. Now, coming back to altered state of consciousness, I think this is actually an important definition because it makes us see at least one side of Buddhism and how it came to America. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but meditation became sort of popular in the 50s and 60s. They're not the first ones to do it. Even before them, like let's say 100 years ago, that you had some American people inviting Indian teachers to tell them about meditation, and there was a sense that it would sort of bring you closer to God or something like that, or closer to your mind, clear your mind, sort of like what we're talking about. So there's a long history of meditation in America, but it became more popular with the beatniks in the 50s and then the hippies in the 60s and 70s, I suppose. And one reason is they like to do drugs, right? LSD in particular, but other drugs too. And so there was a sense that if you do drugs and meditate, then it might be even cooler. Or if you don't want to have the negative consequences of doing drugs, you can just meditate and stop doing drugs, right? And so that is how it kind of entered into the mainstream is people like, for example, the Beatles, right? Have you seen like the Beatles on Johnny Carson where they're all wearing suits and they're very sort of clean cut? You know what I'm talking about? It's black and white and they're all just sort of handsome young people. Then sometime into the 60s, they go to India and they learn about meditation. They start smoking weed and that sort of thing. So you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so there's this bizarre cultural transition that happens and it's kind of exemplified by the Beatles. And that's when meditation becomes popular. People like the Beatles start meditating, and everybody's like, what? The Beatles are meditating? Very interesting. Maybe I should give that a try. And so it has this connotation of drug use in America. But if you go to most, let's just say, Asian traditions and say, hey, are you guys like doing drugs, meditating? They'd be like, what? Are you crazy? You know, a major ethical part of Buddhist practice for everybody is to not do drugs. And so this is sort of a unique blend that comes out in America, but nonetheless, it is a big reason why Buddhism is popular in America and why meditation became popular too. Now, of course, this controlled manner part is important, right? Because if you do a bunch of drugs, it is not in a controlled manner. And just so we're all clear, drugs are bad, right? Don't do drugs, kids. And so before the life of the Buddha, yoga and meditation already existed. It's not like the Buddha invented it or something. We saw that in the life story of the Buddha. Remember, he saw the four sights, all these suffering, and then the person who's sort of meditating and sort of clear and peaceful. So he gave it a try too. We've already talked about why people do it. And there's kind of a complicated philosophical background to this that maybe we just don't need to get into. But what happens with the Buddha is he comes along and he develops a new kind of meditation. Whereas other people were doing this meditation to really clear their mind and sort of focus, like what we were talking about, and basically focus on one object all the time. The Buddha comes in and he introduces a new analytical type of meditation, which we'll talk about later. So fast forward to the late 20th century, you get mindfulness. And Stephen brought this up because he took the intro class with me. I introduced these ideas, but we're going to get a little deeper into them today. It is sort of this combination of, well, I guess first let's say there's a full title for mindfulness. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, is a standard acronym. It might even be a trademarked acronym. I'm pretty sure it probably is. Jon Kabat-Zinn invented this technique. And basically what he did, just like the Buddha reimagined meditation but did not invent it, here we have an American guy reimagining meditation and trying to solve a problem with it, more specifically stress and anxiety, right? We're all stressed out. We've already talked about this, right? At the beginning of class, I feel like the beginning of every class, I ask you guys how you're doing, and you're all tired and stressed out. And I'm like, yeah, me too. I'm tired and stressed out, right? And so Jon Kabat-Zinn sees all of us tired and stressed out Americans, and he's like, you know what? We should do something about this. Let's come up with a meditation plan where we can deal with our stress, right? Mindfulness-based stress reduction. And so it's based on Buddhist practices, but it's adapted for kind of a secular society, right? To the point where, you know, you fast forward and enter into the 21st century, you have these mindfulness apps that is what Aiden had heard of, and maybe you guys have heard of too. And they're pretty ubiquitous. You see them all over the place. There are advertisements for mindfulness apps, which might feel like an oxymoron, but you know, we live in strange times. So before, I mean, we've already sort of led up to this quite a bit. Why don't we just jump in? There's a long one and a short one. Let's see, what time is it? It's 7:30. So we still have a ton of time. Should we just do the long one? Let's do the long one. All right. So this, again, it's Headspace. Just to be clear, nobody's paying me. This is not an advertisement for Headspace. I think, you know, Headspace seems like a fine program. It's the British guy. Yeah, he has a weird name too. I don't think it's listed here. They always just call him Andy in the show. I forget what his last name is. It's something really ridiculous, actually. Puttycomb is his name. Andy Puttycomb. What a ridiculous name. You can't make up a more ridiculous name than that. I guess you probably could. Something like Plum Bottom or something. But Andy Puttycomb is still pretty good. So Andy Puttycomb and let's make it big. Andy Puttycomb is our host today. He has a very soothing British voice. And I think this is like just an excerpt. They want you to buy their product, right? So again, just to be clear, don't buy their product unless you really want to. This is sort of like a free sample, let's say, of Headspace. It's a British guy. He was a monk. He tells you that many times throughout the program. He used to be a monk, and now he's sort of adapted what he learned as a monk for our stressed out modern society. He makes many promises. He sort of just jumps into this sample. And so maybe I can kind of give you some background on it. So obviously, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. Maybe I'll pause the recorder. So there are two kinds of meditation. One is called calming. And this is the one that has been around since, I don't know, people have existed, basically. It's just trying to sort of focus your mind. And that's basically what we just did, is we did sort of a calming meditation where you're stressed out and you're amped up and you're bouncing all over the place, which frankly I was at the beginning of class, and I feel much more calm right now. This will sort of calm you down and help you generate what I'm calling here a mental absorption or concentration, right? It allows you to concentrate. Another way to think about it is ADD, ADHD. These were sort of new diagnoses when I was a kid, and people have argued it was sort of let's say, overdiagnosed. Like a lot of kids maybe who just had trouble paying attention in class were then given Ritalin and sort of had some problems as a result. I think they reeled that back probably for your generation, but I'm sure at least someone in this class is having problems with ADHD right now. And, you know, I'm not here to say that that's all, there's no physiological basis to it. I think there is, but I also would argue we're all dealing with attention deficit disorders to a certain degree, right? Problems with attention. You know, I blame my phone for a lot of problems in my life. It's obviously me and how I use my phone. But my attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. All these little red dots with numbers in them. And it's just like, I need to see what the red dot says. I need to know, right? So we're all constantly being sort of pulled in these different directions to the point where it is just absurd. It's hard to even do anything anymore, right? We're all being distracted by all this stuff. And so one thing that meditation offers you is a way to focus. Imagine that, right? That focusing is a skill, that cultivating your attention is a skill that you can practice and get better at. It is the truth, right? It is a fact that if you practice focusing on things, you will get better at it. It doesn't mean you'll be like amazing at it, right? It doesn't mean you'll all of a sudden one day have no problems with your phone or whatever, but you will get better at it. I guarantee. No, I can't guarantee, but that is what is being promised here. I'll just say that. Now, the other piece that the Buddha did kind of invent, so this is the Buddhist intervention now, is called insight meditation. The Sanskrit word is vipassana. It's used actually pretty commonly in English. People go on vipassana retreats. I don't know if you have ever done this or you know someone who has. Sometimes I meet random people and they're like, oh yeah, I've done like a 10-day vipassana retreat. I'm like, oh, wow, you meditated for 10 days straight. That's kind of amazing. And so the goal for these retreats is to generate wisdom. So how do you do that, right? I asked you a moment ago about Buddha nature practices and how you can sort of dissolve things and then make them anew. And I compared it to QAnon, which is not the greatest thing to compare it to. This is actually a little different from QAnon. How is it different? Is you do dissolve things, but the goal for this one is to just dissolve what is false, right? There are false things around us. This notion, like, for example, I am always going to be healthy and happy and I'm going to be whole and I'm never going to die, which is how I usually approach my life. That is false, unfortunately, right? I will get old. I will get sick. Remember this stuff, old age, sickness, and death? This is one of the very basic Buddhist meditations, is to imagine your body composed of parts, dissolving into parts, right? Remember, imagine the bones inside of your body, imagine the blood and the flesh and all the skin and whatever, and imagine all the sort of the gross stuff in your guts and everything. And then imagine these things changing, shifting, transforming, right? And so what is the goal of this is to see your body as really what it is, a composite of parts. Again, it's trying to see things more clearly, generate wisdom and understanding into particular phenomena, is how I phrased it here. You can apply this to your mind. Look at the different parts of your mind and think about how your mind works. And of course, the Buddhists tell you how your mind works. There's form, feeling, sensation, mental formations, and consciousness. And so you can observe your consciousness, observe your feelings and memories and so forth. It's more exploratory, this mode of meditation. So hopefully that makes sense. How is this different from QAnon? Like we said before, QAnon is almost like you're trying to make yourself blind and then project whatever it is you want to project onto reality. This is just trying to see things as they are, right? To cut through these projections and try to see reality as it is. And by, again, following along what the Buddhists tell you is reality. So there's a little bit of a double side to this, because on the one hand, they're saying you're seeing how reality as it is. On the other hand, they're also telling you how reality is, right? So there still is potential for some brainwashing here. And I'm not saying that everybody should sign up to be doing these meditations or anything like that. Is that pretty clear? Any questions about these two kinds of meditations? One is more exploratory, one is more about concentration, right? So in terms of concentration, there are different objects you can focus on, an image, a concept, an emotion. You can bring up an emotion that you like, right? For example, I think on the next slide, do I have it on the next slide? Or maybe it's further down, but you can bring up things like love and compassion and kindness, right? Maybe I'm really mad at somebody, or I'm jealous of them, or I have a weird relationship with them, and I don't like it, but I don't know what to do about it, right? You can, again, sort of dissolve this bad feeling. It's like, I don't want to feel this way anymore, right? And you can, through these meditations, sort of try to take that away and put something else in there. There are whole meditations where it's like, first you imagine someone you love, like a really nice kind of love, like your mom or somebody you have a good relationship with. Usually they recommend your mom, but obviously not everybody has a good relationship with their mom. But you imagine somebody you feel close to, someone you love, and then extend that to somebody who's just like a random person you've never met before, and then you have met, but they don't really mean anything to you, a neutral person. Then you can extend this to the person you have problems with, right? So this is a way you can develop love and compassion and these sorts of things. There are also promises of transcendent states, or trance states is what they're called here, jhanas, where if you go deeper and deeper into your mind, like we were talking about how time started to feel sort of distorted, and maybe your sense of space became a little distorted. So there are, or at least this is the map that the Buddhists give you, these 8 different levels, and you don't have to worry about the details of this, but it's just sort of, as a concept, sort of interesting. Then as you go deeper into these levels of consciousness, you get deeper into what are parallel to the realms of the gods. And so there's a sense, if you want to be reborn as a god, you do these really deep meditations, and then you'll end up in some sort of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, all these deeper, deeper, deeper levels of consciousness. And in the life story of the Buddha, this is what he was doing with his friends in the woods, right? After he left his life as the prince and he wanted to try to find the end of suffering, he was playing with these sorts of meditations, but he ultimately abandoned them. And again, that's why we focus so much on the life story of the Buddha, because it actually contains within it many important Buddhist teachings. He ultimately abandons them, even though there are promises of extrasensory perception, like clairvoyance, which means you can kind of see, quote unquote, see into far places, right? Like I could see into whatever Smith Hall right now and sort of see what is happening in there. You could hear distant sounds, recall previous lives, know the thoughts of others, right? Ooh, creepy. So I could know that, I can know what you guys are doing, even though you're not sharing your cameras with me. I still can see you, everybody. No, I can't actually see you, but that's what's being promised here, right? Is this knowledge of all things that are happening all over the place. But again, the Buddha rejects all of this. Why do you think he rejects it? Why doesn't he want telepathy or whatever else? Why doesn't he want these special powers that are being promised here? Why do you think he rejects this stuff? Hey, why not? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like a game or something, right? It's like you get to play the game, and it's a good time when you're playing the game, but eventually, game's over, and you're still just naked in the woods, Buddha, right? He was wearing a loincloth, right? Uh, yeah, so if you couldn't hear him, Aiden said effectively, this too will not lead to enlightenment. Remember that was a line from the book, something like that. He tried all these cool meditations. He said, this too will not lead to enlightenment, even though it really is quite entertaining. And in fact, Buddhists will give you warnings about this kind of thing. It's not, they don't say don't do it, but they give you warnings. Don't become attached to these states. Don't become attached to the euphoria that you experience as you get into these deeper levels of consciousness, because that attachment will keep you away from enlightenment. What they're arguing, at least. And so again, this is sort of it's not a Buddhist practice. It's not uniquely Hindu. There were meditators in Christian traditions too, like the Desert Fathers of the Gnostic traditions from however many years ago, 1800 years ago, something like that. There was sort of I'm not going to say a total shift away, but meditation wasn't like a major Christian practice later on, but it never totally disappears either. Is that a hint?
Yeah, yeah. You like someone like really good, you like meditate and start 2 weeks,
So Aiden had a question. What happens if you meditate in a dark room for 2 weeks? And actually, there are labs. I think the researcher's name is Willoughby Britton at Brown University, who's researching this same sort of practice. Yeah. Basically, what happens if you deprive? It's sort of like these sensory deprivation chambers. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no,
Yeah. And so I've actually never done it before. I'm kind of curious about it, to be honest. But if you stay in the dark for long enough, your eyes start to do weird things. You would imagine it's like, okay, I'm in the dark. All I see is the dark. But eventually you start, yeah, some sort of light vision starts showing up. It's almost like, do you ever get floaters in your eyes? You know what I'm talking about?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like particularly in the morning, but even now I feel like if I looked at the light at the right angle or something, I'd get some sort of floater in my eye. And it's sort of like that. It's just like your eyes start to do weird things, right? And again, it's a reminder that we do not see reality for what it is, right? Our eyes do play tricks on us, even though they're pretty good, right? Or they generally do a good job. If you sit in the dark for a while, you will be reminded that you are full of interesting projections that you're sending out into the world all the time. I don't know if this happens to you. Maybe this isn't too much information, but sometimes, like, maybe I'm looking at a screen too long, or I don't know what it is. Sometimes I get up and I look at a wall. Like, maybe let's say I get up and go to the bathroom and I'm just looking at the wall doing my thing, and then all of a sudden there's this like wheel of light that starts spinning around in front of me. Has this ever happened to anybody else? Probably not. Maybe this is just me doing too much Buddhist study stuff. But it does happen to me, and I'm just like, what is happening to me? Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, there are people who are kind of looking into these things and wondering what's going on with this light show. So Buddhists have loved this sort of stuff for a long time, right? This altered state of consciousness induced in a controlled manner. That's crazy that happens sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy. And maybe there's some community on Reddit or something where they talk about this sort of thing. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And again, that he likes to get high, right? Isn't that his thing? And so again, it's sort of like, hey, and honestly, this thing between existence and non-existence, I've already said drugs are bad, but now that we've said that, this thing between existence and non-existence, what are drugs doing, right? Is they're bringing you right into some weird space in between those two things. Things are not as they usually appear. And so if you're Joe Rogan, you're used to being in that space in between. So it wouldn't surprise me that he'd be into meditation as well. So this is the calming stuff. Again, this is like, it's not special to Buddhists. The Buddhists do this sort of stuff, but it's not like they own it. This is the more special Buddhist stuff, the insight meditation, where you observe your subjective experience. I basically already went through this. You're observing your feelings and your mood and so forth. And usually these are done in combination, right? So you do some initial meditation, you develop this capacity to concentrate, right? You kind of get in the groove like we did with the 10-minute meditation. And then that's when the real work begins, right? As you're concentrating, then you cultivate some sort of understanding about impermanence or some insight into reality, some sort of loving kindness or compassion or joy or equanimity or whatever it is that you're trying to do. You cultivate that. And then once you have that feeling, because feelings like this, these realizations, they can be fleeting sometimes, right? You find that feeling and then you sit with it for a while, right? And you can kind of breathe into whatever it is that you are trying to cultivate at that moment. So these are often used in combination, sort of one after the other, focusing, breathing, and then once you lose your focus, then you can do another sort of analytical meditation to get back to it. Okay, that was a lot. It's only 8:06. We usually stop around now. I guess it's usually 10 minutes after now. Why don't we call it here for now? How's that sound? Take a break? So let's reconvene at 8:20. Let's take a break. Reconvene at 8:20. Meditation. Very exciting. And so that was a little discussion of meditation, right? We gave it a little try to see what it's like. Again, there are many different kinds of meditation. What else is there to say? One thing from the exam you might remember is the Buddha's big final words were to be vigilant, right? And meditation and vigilance kind of pair together too. Can you see that? Where in our everyday life, it's sort of hard to pay attention all the time. It's sort of hard to see how things work, and sometimes we're busy and we can't pay attention. And so what meditation forces you to do is to stop being busy and to pay attention to what's happening to you and the world around you, right? It gives you a chance to reflect on the things that you do and the effects that they have, and many other details of life. So that's another way to think about these kind of uniquely Buddhist meditations, is trying to see things as they unfold, to embody that vigilance practice that the Buddha recommended. Now we are going to shift. We've seen this slide before, but I just want to remind you, we're going to shift into the Vajrayana. So we've talked a lot about Mahayana, and we're not like leaving Mahayana for good. And in fact, they kind of tie together in a lot of ways. They're not mutually exclusive. But the Vajrayana is like yet another elaboration on what we've seen so far. And we're going to focus on meditation practices in Vajrayana. And what I'm going to ask you to do in groups in a moment, actually in more than just one moment, in a few slides, is compare Vajrayana meditation with the Andy Puttycomb meditation. And they're actually very different. It would probably be easier to talk about the differences than the similarities. But they're both called meditation for some reason. So it'll hopefully you guys will find it as interesting as I find it. So here's an image from Tantric Buddhism. Maybe we can just start with this image. What do you see? Describe this picture to me. What do you see here? It's like one of those Rorschach tests. No, not exactly Rorschach test. What do you see here? Does this look particularly Buddhist to you? Looks very Hindu. Oh, okay. What looks Hindu to you? A Buddhist blue man. Walter says it looks like a Hindu blue man. Aiden agrees. He says it looks Hindu. And he said the 4 arms. Lauren Duggan, would you like to talk? You just, okay, you don't want to talk. All right. Not very peaceful. Seems corrupt. What seems corrupt about it, Walter? Looks like he is fire bending. Interesting. That's a reference to the Avatar, right? What does it mean to fire bend? Control fire, so you can shoot it around or something. I've never seen Avatar before. I've heard of it.
They can just like control
Manipulate fire. Okay, that makes sense. I read recently a Tibetan cartoonist criticizing them because a lot of the themes in Avatar are based on Tibetan culture. So it's an interesting connection. I'm actually intrigued by that comment. But this Tibetan cartoonist was criticizing it because they don't really give props to Tibet, right? They take all this stuff and then they don't tell you that it's Tibetan. Honestly, kind of like our good friend Andy Puttycomb, right? He's basically doing the same thing. He's taking what is essentially a Tibetan Buddhist practice, and then sort of pulls it. He seems manipulative. The Fire Lord. What's he stepping on here? Can you guys tell? They do not look happy. He's stepping on somebody, right? And this is actually a very common motif in tantric practice. So yeah, I think that's it. Disturbing the peace. 4 arms. We got 2 here. 1, 2. Oh, the thing down here? It's a little hard to tell. Yeah, it looks like it's either one being with 4 arms or maybe multiple beings, but it's probably one being with 4 arms. Yeah, wouldn't be surprising. So this is very common. I think there's a parallel. I'm really reaching here. I'm not an art historian. I think there is a parallel in Renaissance art where you have like who is it, Michael, who's like stomping on dragons and spearing them and that sort of stuff. It's a similar kind of idea, right? You could interpret this as something bad, right? Remember the muck that covers the gold? That same sort of motif gets applied here, but instead of stripping it away, you are violently subduing the bad things in your life. And so it is violent. You guys are right. Violence is definitely a theme here, and that might be kind of disturbing to you. And this is why Tantric Buddhism is often called esoteric Buddhism. Have you guys heard this term before? Esoteric. So esoteric, the opposite is exoteric. Maybe. So what eso and exo? Exo means outside. The X is outside, right? Eso is referring to inside, so that we can start there. Inside, outside, what? What's that referring to? Esoteric. Oh, you're thinking of Terra, which means Earth. I see. That's what you're thinking of. It could be related to that. I'm gonna guess it's not though, because Terra usually has two R's. Exoteric, esoteric, but I'm not sure what the teric part means, to be honest. Did you look it up, Aiden? What does it say? That is exoteric, right? Is that, you looked up exoteric with an X, right? Well, no, you're not bad. We're talking about both words together. There you go. So if you couldn't hear Aiden, he said exoteric with the X is, again, outside, for the outside public, for the general public to understand. Doesn't matter who you are, you can learn these sorts of practices. That's everything we've learned so far has been exoteric Buddhism. Esoteric is kind of secret and special and reserved only for initiated practitioners, right? You have to follow initiation rituals in order to be allowed to study this stuff. So, in fact, it's a little controversial that I'm teaching it to you guys at all. We'll see a video in a little while where the teacher is basically saying, like, if you don't have the initiation for these practices, you shouldn't do them. And we'll discuss why. One reason is these are the kinds of bodhisattvas, and this is a bodhisattva. These are the kinds of bodhisattvas that get involved. Unlike the other famous bodhisattva that we saw before, do you remember her name or his name, depending on what time period you're talking about? Guan Yin. Yeah, remember Guan Yin? Very peaceful, very loving, very kind. The bodhisattva of compassion, right? All of a sudden here, we have this bodhisattva, very simply put, he represents power. He is violent. You can tell, right? He's violent. Now, a Buddhist will be quick to tell you he's violent against negative emotions, right? It's like being violent against your anger, which is a bit of a kind of a difficult thing to conceptualize. And so there's a sense like he is enlightened, he is fierce, right? And he doesn't put up with bullshit. This thing that he is holding is called a vajra, which I could draw on the board. I don't think anybody would see it very well, so maybe I'll just look it up here. A vajra means a lot of different things, but it mostly refers to just this instrument. You might be thinking, what the hell is that? And it's basically a ritualized weapon. So it used to be bigger and longer and scarier. Then over time, it sort of shrinks down. It becomes this more sort of symbolic image of power, right? And you might notice he has a vajra in his hand. Can you see that? So he's holding this vajra. And I've told you this tradition is called Vajrayana. So vajra means a lot of different things. I try to translate everything. This is pretty untranslatable. You can call it adamantium, adamantine, the adamantine tradition, the adamantine vehicle, which means it's very powerful, strong, hard. It's very hard metal. Some people call this a power bolt because it's sort of like a thunderbolt. But again, it means many different things and sort of combines all of them together. One thing we can say very simply about it is a symbol of power. And that this figure, his name is Vajrapani. Did I write his name at the bottom? I did. And so Pani means in hand. He is the one who is holding a Vajra. Shakna Dorje in Tibetan. You can see all around him, we have more peaceful Buddhas, right? So the peaceful Buddhas are not gone. But in the middle is this fierce, powerful figure. And you can imagine when the Christians first showed up in Tibet and started to see these pictures, they're like, oh my God, idol worshippers, right? And so when they saw these things, they were very disturbed. When they saw Guan Yin holding the baby, they're like, okay, we can get down with that. But when they saw this, they were very disturbed because it sort of looks like a demon, right? You guys agree with me? We've got sharp teeth, big eyes, multiple eyes, flames and fire everywhere. You guys were actually very kind to call him a firebender because that's kind of a positive thing. But, you know, it looks like a demon from hell, doesn't it? Yeah, it's kind of a disturbing thing. And that's on purpose, right? Vajrayana Buddhism is designed to manipulate scary images, things like ghosts and demons. Figures like this are called upon to protect you from ghosts and demons, right? It is this missing piece that is often pulled out of religion because it's sort of a scary piece. It's power, right? There are bodhisattvas of compassion, bodhisattvas of wisdom. We've talked about compassion of wisdom for the last few classes. Here's the piece that the Tantric Buddhists add in: power. So what kind of practices they do? They do meditation, also ritual. We haven't really talked about Buddhist rituals very much. It becomes very important here. Yoga, mantra recitation. We're going to learn a mantra in a moment. Some of the goals are success and power, like worldly power, domination, that sort of thing. Transformation. And they're sort of different than the other Buddhist goals we've seen, right? We just said a moment ago that the Buddha rejected a lot of meditation practices because he doesn't want this sort of stuff, right? He's like, this is a distraction. All of a sudden, the Tantric Buddhists come around and say, actually, wait a minute. We do want that sort of stuff, right? We want all of it. We want everything. And so there is a kind of a connection to Hinduism. You guys are correct to say that, although this is, by this point, a very Buddhist figure. So this is Vajrapani. He's kind of the Tantric Buddhist figure, or at least one of the main ones. There's Tantric meditation, and not all Vajrayana is scary. I wanted to scare you with kind of the initial evocative one, but this one doesn't look so scary, right? Not scary at all. We've got the Vajras here, and we've got multiple Buddhas. Have we seen multiple Buddhas together before? Maybe we have, but I don't think so, right? No. So this is also something kind of new, is with this greater vehicle, and then finally into the Vajra vehicle, into the Vajrayana, we get all kinds of Buddhas. We get Buddhas in every direction. And so that's actually how this is organized. We have Buddha to the north, Buddha to the south, Buddha to the west, Buddha to the east, Buddha in the middle. And even the, north, west, southwest, and so forth, there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas going in those directions too. So we don't have to go over that. We already went over that. Power and transformation. Here are some very specific things. We're going to talk about all of them in more detail in a moment. Themes of sexuality and violence show up. If you ever have been to the Rubin Museum, you might have seen some Buddhist deities not only be violent, like this guy, but you might have even seen them have sex with each other. There are female deities or female bodhisattvas, female Buddhas, and sometimes they are in sexual embrace. And there are big statues and big paintings of this. And so it's not to say like these are some free-loving hippies or something like that, because if you go to a Tibetan Buddhist monastery now, it just looks like any other monastery that is out there. But at the same time, there is room for sexuality as well, which is often kind of washed out of most of the religions we're exposed to. So some people find this appealing. It's like, finally, I can have some sort of sacred aspect to my sex and violence. That's all I really want in life, is to mix the sacred with sex and violence. And if that is what you've been thinking, then my friend, Tantra is for you. Like I said, there are initiation rituals. And in order to do this initiation, you have to have a master. So all of a sudden, the teacher becomes very important, which is something we'll see in about 2 weeks. So these initiation rituals become important. And, these diagrams are called mandalas, where they kind of establish an order among the Buddhas, right? Because once you have multiple Buddhas, then you have to think, how do they relate to each other? So we get these diagrams that show up. And then finally, there's this practice called divine pride. And this is what we're going to go into more detail about. And this ties in with the reading for today. It was pretty short reading. We do some visualizations, and then we do some divine pride toward the end. And so anyways, divine pride, what is it? Is you do this dissolution that we talked about before, the QAnon move, where you dissolve everything into emptiness, but instead of reestablishing yourself as Q, here you're reestablishing yourself as a Buddha. And not just like gold wrapped in filth or something kind of lame like that, like straight up, totally enlightened, 100% already there Buddha. Because why not, right? You're imagining stuff. Why sell yourself short and just give props to Donald Trump? Why not give props to yourself? And so this is kind of the central tantric move, right? This is why it's esoteric. You guys might be starting to get uncomfortable because I'm talking about all these crazy sort of promises that it makes, but indeed, this is what it promises, is enlightenment in this life. And the way you do it is it's kind of like a fake it till you make it. You ever heard dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have? That's what I'm doing today. No, that's what's happening here, right? Is you basically imagine yourself as a Buddha, and you do it every day, and you do it long enough until logically you become one, right? That's what the core of this practice is divine pride. So the reading for today was focused on Tara, who is not one of these scary bodhisattvas, although people do divine pride meditations on scary bodhisattvas too. She is a nice one. She's a lot like Guan Yin, in fact. So Tara is more of a South Asian figure. She did not become as important in East Asia, but it's another sort of nice female bodhisattva figure. Tara literally means she who saves. And I know there are many people in America named Tara. Whenever I see their name, I think, oh, that's a bodhisattva. So she who saves, so she who ferries beings across the ocean of samsara. There's a sense that if you're in trouble, you can pray to her, which again is very similar to what we saw with Guan Yin earlier. So they play very, very similar roles, but the relationship is a bit different. So again, we have these mandalas that are organizing groups of Buddhas, this deity yoga, we're identifying with the Buddha. And finally, here is a mantra, Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha. And maybe, have you heard of mantras before? Is that something you heard before? So it's an English word, right? If you look it up, you'll find something. People usually mean it as something like some sort of phrase you repeat often or something like that, right? And so really in this context, it is a phrase you repeat often, but it's more like a magic spell or something, right? It's more like a special prayer. Let's call it a prayer because it's associated with the deity here. It's a special prayer that you recite in order to evoke the deity, identify with the deity, or in this case, the bodhisattva who is Tara. So Om Tara, I pray, O Tara, swift one, so be it. Om Tara Tara Turi Soha. So why don't we watch some things? I got some more videos for you. And so as we watch this, I want you to think, how do these meditations compare to what we saw before, right? What's similar, what's different? Obviously, in order to get a sense of them, I'm going to ask you to look through the reading and get a sense of how do you do it, right? What is the practice? What are you doing with your body? What are you doing with your speech? What are you doing with your mind? What do you get from it? What's the point, right? What are you trying to achieve? What's the goal here? And you'll see it's not necessarily enlightenment. In fact, there are other things being promised here. And so this is, again, it's a glimpse into what Tantra is all about. So let's see. I think this one is the English language one. Is this the English one? Yeah. So here is, I told you the Tibetan or the Buddhist teacher is very important in doing these practices. And I hate to say it, he's a little long-winded, so we're not going to watch this whole thing, but I do want to give you sort of the highlights of it. And so you can hear a real Tibetan teacher's take on these practices. The sound optimized. Okay, so let's pause.
You're like reflecting sort of on like your own body and state, whereas the other one is more like kind of projecting these sort of thoughts of yourself in like these sorts of like positions, I guess. And it seems a little bit more like, for some reason, like I get like a sort of cocky sort of energy from it. It's like I am this great thing, as opposed to like the other one is just like, how am I feeling? What am I thinking? Or like thinking about like, you know, yourself as parts. There's like a weird sort of like different mental thing going on there.
I like that. So maybe I could try to rephrase this. So what Stephen is describing is that we have two exercises for reimagining ourselves, right? One of which we're sort of getting in touch with our body and checking out our body and see how our body's doing, checking out our breath, seeing how our breath is doing, checking out our mind, see how our mind is doing. And that is sort of the self that we're exploring, right? In this other one, we're still sort of exploring ourselves. It's not like Tara comes out of nowhere, right? She's still coming from us, but we are interacting with this projection in a complicated way, right? And Stephen is sort of put off by the cocky energy. I'd be curious to hear more about that. What felt cocky about you in the Tara thing?
Well, I don't know if it's like cocky is the right word, but it's like the whole like I am a bodhisattva. Like I am, well, I guess maybe because I'm thinking of a bodhisattva as like someone like more like a Buddha, I guess. Like
Yeah.
I am sort of like this like all-knowing, all-powerful sort of entity that
And
like it's sort of making me think that way. But
and
if I
this
think of
is
it like more as like a bodhisattva, I guess it's not as cocky, I guess.
this is the very high up bodhisattva though. So I think you're right to say that there is almost a cockiness that is being cultivated here, right? On purpose. You are supposed to feel cocky. That is sort of the point of the exercise, right? And so one reason I wanted to show you this Tara meditation is because it is sort of culturally uncomfortable, right? There's a weird Tibetan letter. There's this image. There's this deity we've never heard of before, and it's a little experimental. I've never done this sort of exercise, so I'm just sort of trying things out. But just speaking off the cuff here, what if we reimagine ourselves not as just composed of a body and a mind, which is what we usually think about ourselves as, right? Your body and mind over there, Sophie. Yeah, that's most of what we think about ourselves as being. We got a body and mind, maybe some breath in between. What if we reimagine ourselves not as just a body and a mind or a bounded individual self, but as composed of multiple selves, right? Now, of course, that's a psychological disorder that none of us want to get too down into. But what if Tara were a part of us, right? What part of us would that be? And in some ways, Stephen already answered that question. It's a very confident part of ourselves, right? It's a very advanced, a very wise part of ourselves. In this case, a very kind and compassionate part of ourselves. And so when we isolate that part out, it's almost like pulling the gold out of the shit, right? Is you are just pulling the Buddha nature and putting it out in front of you and manifesting it, right? Manifest, that is a language that a lot of New Age people use, right? Manifestation. You're manifesting these aspects. Again, it's in front of you, but it's also a part of you, right? It's not separate from you in any sort of meaningful way. And so you could imagine doing this sort of practice with Tara is probably pretty nice and good. But if you do it with a figure like this, you become Vajrapani, then some crazy stuff starts to happen, doesn't it? Right? All of a sudden, you manifest this power that usually we are not allowed to have. We're not supposed to have, unless you're maybe a professional athlete. Then we might allow it until you start being violent outside of the football field. Then we have to send you to jail, right? And so there is something behind these tantric practices that is a little unsettling. So if you were reading this and feeling unsettled, then you are not alone, right? And that is why these are esoteric practices that are usually kept away from some people. Did anybody get into the what is the point? What do these promise? We talked about it a lot in here, but I'm curious, folks in the chat.
We kind of said that like for like one like for this one you like want like power, enlightenment, or like it's more like I don't want to say it's kind of selfish sort of because it's like you want something so you're gonna sort of think of yourself in a certain manner to get it, whereas the other one is more like I'm doing this to help others and get other people involved and help them get enlightened and like continue, even though like I'm continuing to suffer sort of, others can get out of that sort of situation.
Wait, I missed the comparison. So which one is feels more selfish?
uh the Tara, the
Or one feels
meditation that we were
selfish?
just talking about, yeah, because you're gaining some sort of power or like
Okay.
enlightenment sort of, so
Mhm.
it's like I don't know if it's selfish is the right word for it, but like since you are the one gaining it and the other one is more like for helping others, sort of, or like putting yourself in a certain mindset so that you can get to that point, I feel like is like a noticeable comparison.
And when you say the other one, you're talking about the British guy, Andy Puttycombe.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And so yeah, what one place that we looked in our group here was on 327. We had there's this section that we were highlighting the benefits of the visualizations at the very end, right? It sort of promises what you might get. And I think I made a slide for this. It probably would be at the very end. We get these magic powers, right? So we emerge from the trance where we are visualizing ourselves as Tara. And we already talked about this in class, but all these magical things, like we can empower weapons, and we get magical foot and eye ointments, and the power of invisibility, alchemy, power to fly, travel, power to visit nether worlds. And so when we think about what is the motivation of this practice, it is very different than Andy Puttycombe, right? I think it's interesting that Stephen was talking about what's selfish and what's more altruistic. I would agree that there's something kind of selfish about this. You want power for yourself. I would also say that that is okay to want power for yourself. I know we're told that you're not supposed to want that, but I would argue it is okay to want power for yourself. I'm not so sure that Puttycombe is particularly altruistic, though, right? I'd say it's sort of neutral. Would you guys agree with me? You can kind of do with whatever you want. And in fact, there's a critique of Puttycombe where, and not specifically him, but mindfulness in general, where let's say I'm a CEO, right? And I'm not so different from a CEO. I'm your teacher. I will crack the whip and force you guys to do things, right? Let's say I'm a CEO and Aiden's not meeting his numbers. I need more code from him or whatever. So I tell him, do some meditation, and then you will code more efficiently for me, right? Is that a particularly happy existence? Not so happy, right? And there are similar critiques. I might have even shown some of these cartoons in class where, actually no, there's a different meme that I'm thinking of where basically it's like, let's say it's a pandemic and the bosses come in and they're like, hey, I hear you guys are stressed out. What can we do to help you all? And it's like, how about you give us more money and better healthcare, and you give us more days off and a reasonable wage and not so many hours and some time to see our family and all this other thing. And they're like, we were thinking more like yoga, right? Something like that, right? There's a similar sense of this is what Headspace is doing, right? It's sort of a band-aid on a broken system. Whereas, of course, Tara is not a band-aid, right? Tara, this Tara meditation is trying to turn you into a goddamn superhero. So I would agree with you that the motivation, the promise, the benefits, all of these things are different. But I would encourage you to try to step outside of yourselves a little bit and try to see what is valuable in the Tara meditation, even though we are predisposed to see magic and think, no, thank you. At the same time, I think there is something enticing about this, and maybe I'm still figuring out how to present that. So I think we should just call it a day. I'm kind of tired. It's late. We technically still have like 15 minutes, but it would just be painful to drag it out for 15 minutes, right? But do you guys have anything more to say? Stephen was very nice to humor me and talk to me. Unless anybody else wants to talk to me. You guys want to talk? Anybody else in the chat want to reflect on the conversation you just had? All right, I'm not going to twist any arms. Let's call it a day. So next week we'll come back. We'll talk more about magic, right? And so I think we'll be able to take a more sort of thoughtful approach to these practices. I sort of just threw you in and told you to swim here. So next time we'll have a bit more to prepare us. So if you thought today was kind of interesting, the next